Like or hate Donald Trump and his views, one of the refreshing aspects of his claim to the presidency is the political subtext that the playing field has shifted and nothing is entirely out of reach. On a local level, can this mean that Ocean County Democrats, with the soundest campaign platforms, now have a chance to reach the independents and the disenfranchised Republicans they need to help them succeed? They need to capture seats in the legislature this November. Meet Michael Cooke, attorney based in Toms River, who has brought his message to bear as a one-time candidate for county freeholder seat and an aspirant to the 3rd Congressional District. Is the thirst for new leadership strong enough to lift him past his opponents? He seeks to represent the Legislative District 10. That's mainly coast-hugging from Bayhead down to Seaside and west from there through Toms River, Island Heights, and Manchester. Michael, let's start with that concept. Is a vote for Michael Cooke a vote for change? And how so?
Well, I think it is. Some of the big issues that we have going on here in the district, Toms River and Brick, two of the biggest and most successful schools in in a state with really amazingly successful public schools, just recently lost an awful lot of money from the state for their budgets. Part of that is an underfunding of the 2008 school plan. We have to do something to get that money back. We seem to be locked in a little bit of a fight's not the word, but a back and forth between some districts. You know, one year some districts get more funding than they need. The next year they're expected to give some of that back. That hadn't been happening for a while, and now it has. My feeling is none of our public schools right now are rationally speaking overfunded. They're overfunded as part of that plan. But if we keep funding our schools that way, for example, in answer to your question, if we keep funding our schools by property taxes and with the hope that the state actually fully funds this plan, we're going to have this back and forth with property taxes remain unstable, with the funding to the schools remain unstable. So we're going to have to look into that, look into how we fund most of our government. Property taxes pay for a good chunk of what we deal with on a day-to-day basis in our lives, but they're sort of a random. They're random in the sense that they don't follow any real rational flow of income or flow of revenue into the people's pockets and then on to make their contribution to the government. So that's one way. The school funding has to be looked at. The way we do taxation has to be looked at. We've been tinkering with real estate tax for a long time and not really solving the problem of it continuing to spiral up. What I've been looking at and proposing is that we move more towards a progressive income tax, because at least there's a rational connection between how an individual family does in a given year in their finances and how much they're expected to pay to the government.
How do you, not arguing the rationale,
Yep.
how do you communicate that to someone across the aisle, to someone who is a rock-ribbed Republican in Ocean County, who may or may not want to continue voting that way? How do you reach the disenfranchised people? How do you get that to independents?
It's just a lot of smart campaigning, and you just have to take it to them. We've started doing, we did a lot of walking in the beginning. Now we're in more of a phone call sort of phase where we're calling a lot of voters, and you can figure out how you can very easily get the information. I mean, it's a very inside baseball, but you get the information quite easily from the county who's voted recently, what party or not they're affiliated with, and then you just concentrate your efforts on them, and that's what we've been doing in my campaign. Like I said, now we move more towards calling. My motto amongst the campaign is more talking, less walking. the gold standard tends to be an in-person conversation with somebody, but if you have to move a lot of voters, you have to do it however you can and quickly. So that's it. And I don't think you'd have a problem selling a message of, I've got an idea and we've got a real plan for what we might do with your property taxes. A lot of people are skeptical if you just say we're going to do a better job with your property taxes, we're going to keep them from going up. We're barely, I think at this point a lot of politicians are barely bothering to say that they'll lower them. And we're at the point where the promise, as ephemeral as it might be, is, well, we're going to try to keep it, Kim Guadagno is trying to say, we're going to have a 2% limit, a limit of how much higher the property taxes are going to go, and that's, I think, most of the Republican side proposals about what, how you're going to keep control of taxes and what that's going to do for us are kind of based on nothing particular. But even that sort of fanciful sense of, tax policy on the right, the best that they're really saying is we'll keep the increases to a minimum. That's where we are.
Right.
We need fundamentally to rethink how we're doing this, because we're doing the same thing that doesn't really work over and over again and not getting a result.
That involves looking at the spending process.
You're right.
So what are your ideas about altering spending in order to contain that property tax level? Where are we missing the boat? Where is money being wasted?
Well, as you mentioned, I did run for freeholder last year, and the one thing that I noticed and that I looked at a little bit further is we do have a very sort of balkanized, small, a lot of very small government entities, whether it be the freeholder boards, the municipalities, these 600 odd school districts, each with their personnel, their infrastructure. We've been talking about, it's no mystery, we've been talking about consolidation and encouraging consolidation, sort of suggesting, making it easier for towns to consolidate. These are some of the words that I hear argued in legislation. Encourage them to do it, help them, making it okay. We really have to push and sort of insist that a lot of these smaller school districts, municipalities, start to consolidate so that their taxpayers can pay less money, and then we're kind of expanding the base for the individual entities to save some money.
Right. I asked you. Your running mate the same thing. I want to ask you.
Sure.
How does consolidation, even if you just take it at a textbook level, how does that reduce spending? Because are you not placing more responsibility on fewer people who are going to demand more money for that job?
Well, it also takes out of the equation sort of wildly divergent quality of decisions. You have a larger pool of candidates for a smaller group. You have less sort of knee-jerk decisions on some things. You do take a level of administration out. Also, things like purchasing power, if you consolidate it. Another thing that I considered, and I don't have solid numbers on this, but I know a lot of states and districts across the country have had success with this. I'll give you a good example. The state of Texas still, to this day, drives a lot of what's in our textbooks because they are by far the largest textbook buy in the nation. The state of Texas buys every single book for every child in their state. And so, they have enormous purchasing power, and I would say, unfortunately, an enormous amount of influence on what is in textbooks that end up all over the place. Textbook manufacturers, being any other company, well, this is our biggest chunk, so we'll make them all like this to make it cheaper. Some of the things that other states have tried, New York has, for a lot of its public buildings, something called a dormitory authority. So they take responsibility over a big chunk of the government buildings. The spending is all allocated to that organization that takes care of them. We have a huge expense for our schools especially in the inner city, and now increasingly in places like Toms River and Brick, are, you know, brick and mortar infrastructure, the upkeep and repair of our buildings. And I tell this story on the sump all the time. My son is now entering first grade. In his school, where I drop him off, you know, if I have to drop him off early in the morning, there's a overhang with a light fixture. And I noticed one day when it was pouring down rain, that the rain was pouring through the light fixture. Now, I'm sure they have it somehow disconnected so it's not a hazard or anything. You've got a hole in the roof pouring water through, you know, right through a light fixture, and something you would think you repair, but sitting there. Doesn't strike me as an extremely expensive problem, but you know, perhaps it is. But this is where we are. So many of our buildings are in bad condition. I heard a story today, the other day, I was talking to somebody from the PTO in my son's school. They don't have air conditioning, which sounds like a luxury, but if you're starting in September and it's still kind of summertime, it could be, you know, 90 degrees outside without air conditioning, substantially warmer inside. The PTO raised money to buy the air conditioning, which is great, but the town refused to put it in because they didn't have the budget, or the school district refused to put it in, to buy it and put it in the budget to run it, so for the electricity for it. So, you know, these are all issues. These are things that eventually have to be dealt with. There's something that has to be in the budget every year to try to fix. And they're sort of unequal. So you have newer schools, they might have gone through a renovation 20, 30 years into their life, needed renovation 20 to 30 years in their lifetime, so they're good for now. You have older schools that may have been renovated, went up maybe in the 20s. The elementary school I went to in Lyndhurst, New Jersey, went up, if I remember correctly, in 1918, had a renovation in the 50s when they put the high school up, had another renovation a couple of years after I left. I don't know what it's like now, but, you know, these things have life cycles. So right now, Toms River lost a lot of state funding. We have just, not just by looking at the one school that my son goes to, significant maintenance problems, and we have the money to do it. If we had a broad authority who can take care of that, we could, you know, whose responsibility was to, on a regular basis, take care of those things, and every year have a certain budget to do that, it would save money.
Let me ask you a little bit about your philosophy.
Sure.
Phil Murphy, Democrat or Independent Democrat?
I'm going to reject the premise of the question.
Spoken like a true attorney.
Well,
Do you agree with him 100%, or are there areas in which they...
No, I don't. I don't agree with him 100%. I don't agree with most people 100%. I don't agree with you, Tom, 100%. I'm sure we'll figure that out one day. You know, I support I'm a Democrat because, as a Democrat, we have a certain worldview and philosophy in how to handle problems. And in that regard, I agree with Phil. I agree with an awful lot of what he's got out there. I think most of the things that he's recommended are good and strong as far as they go. There's some things that I would do more of, less of, change the aim of a little bit. But so I'm independent in the sense that I have my own set of values, and you know, being part of a political party is having a certain commonality of values such that you can all get along. And I have a little bit of sympathy for the Republicans right now because they're sort of, not that we aren't as Democrats having a little bit of an identity discussion, but they're really having an identity discussion on the other side. And I think that's healthy for a party and a democracy. But so yeah, I'm my own person, an independent thinker, and have my own opinions and thoughts and things that I'd like to do. That Phil has you know, many of them are things that Phil has thought and decided and wants to do, and some of them are things that if I look, I think, well, he hasn't even thought about this. This is a good opportunity for me to bring it up.
Okay, so what of his policies and what of your policies do you see as the most beneficial for change in District 10? What do you see as the thing that needs the biggest amount of attention right now? And how would you approach it?
He mentioned today, he talked just the other day, and about having free community college for, and he, haven't read the whole plan, but free community college, which I think there's a lot of discussion about what we should do in all different levels of school, and it's always the biggest hot button issue, because we all want, I have 2 children, I want them to have the greatest opportunity that they can have. I had some great opportunities based on the places that I went to school. So I think anything we can do to help parents give their children a great education is a good thing. So I think that's an excellent idea. That's an excellent plan.
Let's talk a little bit about the environment in which you live.
Sure.
And I don't mean the political environment, I mean the actual physical environment, because your district hugs the coast, and it's in a very curious position. It's the most vulnerable to ocean storms, and the most dependent on the Army Corps beach replenishment project. There's been an increasing amount of discussion about global warming and its effect on the intensity of the storms we're having.
Right.
Assuming this is true, what are your ideas about the Army Corps project's long-term capabilities? And concomitantly, is it time to start thinking about development, and despite the revenues that creates for property tax support, is it time to start moving inland and away from the coast?
Well, there are programs that are already dealing with that, and I don't know that they're all, I think they sort of run their course, and we've gotten the people off the coast that want to go. There was the Blue Acres program, which is, look, you've been hit by a couple of floods now, would you like to sell your property back to the state? That was, it seemed to be, and my practice for a while was in Middlesex County, and I saw that very successful up there. Waterfront property is popular up there, but there's so much in the identity of Ocean County that goes with the beach. It's going to be hard to do from a legal standpoint. It's hard to just sort of decree it, and we can see that in the fact of how long it took for the project and to get the easements that they needed. So it's hard to do it without it being somewhat voluntary. It's expensive to do it without it being somewhat voluntary, and in some sense it's almost impossible to do some things in terms of moving the development off the water without it being voluntary. And it's another question entirely of what are the sort of ethical, how do you feel ideologically or ethically about forcing people to come off the beach? Now, that having been said, if you own a mortgage on a house, generally speaking, your mortgage company is going to require you to have flood insurance. So most of these people, if they get flooded out, if they're going to have some recourse to their flood insurance. I know that's not perfect, but this is the choice they've made. Generally speaking, there's insurance either available or required. It's going to cost us, no doubt about it, every time as a society, just sort of in terms of some money that ends up coming out of our taxes to help those people who are on the coast. It's a difficult problem, and it's going to require. I'm not trying to dodge the question. I think on a personal level, people are going to have to make this decision, and to a certain extent, the potential resources in terms of being able to fix the problem on their own is going to make the decision for them. Mm-hmm. So increasingly we're going to see people who have the resources to be there until they decide they don't want to be there anymore, or they won't, and they just won't be there anymore. But it's a very difficult question in that it really does cut to the identity of Ocean County to have people on the beach and to have that beachfront property.
In that case, would you advocate on behalf of doubling the Shore Protection Fund, which Margot Walsh at the Jersey Shore Partnership has been battling for probably 10 years now?
Yeah, most of things like that. If I'll take her word for it that it needs to be doubled. I wouldn't be surprised if it needs to be more than
It's at 25 million for the last 20 years. She wants to get it to 50 million.
Yeah,
There's never enough support.
And I haven't looked at it myself, and she's knows her stuff on that. I'd be surprised if it doesn't need to be even higher than that. But you get what you can. You ask for what you think you can get. Yeah. I mean, it has to be done. And they're good questions, because this is sort of what we can do in New Jersey about this problem that's sort of beyond our meager control as even a fairly powerful, fairly populous and wealthy state to do anything about. We can act locally to deal with the effects. We can try our best to act locally to not contribute to the global warming problem, and the climate change problem. I guess is the right way to put it, so we don't get confused when the climate change actually looks like a really cold, blustery winter. It's still climate change caused by heat, by excess warming, but we have to do both. There seems to be a lot of people who are interested, even in Ocean County, where if you ask somebody, a county that voted 70% for Donald Trump, almost 70% for Donald Trump, do you think that county would have a lot of people interested in solar panels and alternative energy? As an abstraction, you'd probably say no. There's a lot of people with solar panels here, and a lot of people who are with fuel-efficient vehicles and trying to get more into renewables. There are also an awful lot of people driving big trucks that suck a lot of fuel, but there's an opportunity for that there, and we should, as our part in overall trying to reduce climate change, we should be in the business of renewables and things like that.
Mr. Cooke, one of the problems that has reared its ugly head in the time that you've been seeking political office, and even before that, has been the opiate addiction problem. It started out simply as dealing on the street, then it became a prescription med problem, and it's affected people from all walks of life, all income levels, all ages. It knows no boundaries of ethnicity, class, creed, background. Now, Governor Christie will be remembered for many things after he's finished in office, but the most positive one will likely be his efforts to help opiate addicts break their chains through quality, affordable treatment. Assuming that foundation, how would you build on that?
Well, I would take the word affordable out, not by making it unaffordable, but I think it needs to be, the assumption needs to be you get treatment if you want it and seek it, and the last thing we should be worrying about is collecting money from these people, because the problem is, if you're really, so many people that I speak to who are involved in this, like on the ground, are just, the biggest problem is getting people who want treatment into treatment. And it's still the fact that if you want treatment, sometimes the best way to do that is to commit a crime and point out, and then you get a task evaluation, and you find your way either into drug court or some other sort of state-funded treatment. And that's, don't misunderstand me. If you happen to do something wrong while you're addicted to drugs, you should have the opportunity to get treatment, period. If you know you have a drug problem, you want help. What we do wrong is we force people into treatment. We sort of coerce them into treatment by saying, you committed a crime. Hey, do you want to get help with your drug problem? And we'll treat it as and it's gotten better, but we'll sort of treat this as you have a problem, and we'll forget that you did this thing wrong. And you probably did do it wrong because you were, in part, because of your addiction. But people don't realize that that feeds the addiction, it feeds the problem in a lot of ways. Yeah, people, they have to be ready. They have to be ready for treatment, and so many of these overdoses, from what I've been hearing, happens when people go in. They're not really ready. They're not really committed to getting well. They come out, they relapse, and they take what they've been taking, but they haven't been taking it for a while, and they take too much. And that's one of the things. It's in part people just sort of devolving into the point where they eventually take the hit that will eventually kill them. But it's also in a lot of cases just sort of people not knowing what they're getting. You know, the fentanyl, the problem with the fentanyl being in some of these packages, and it takes so little of that to have the same effect of so much more heroin.
Well, now you're starting to get to the other side of that coin,
right?
And that is the supplier. They're not concerned about an individual dealing on the street. They're not concerned about the individual who's buying that. It's a commodity for them.
Right.
And fentanyl is an even better commodity because it's cheap, it's available, and it'll kill you. There's always somebody else who's going to buy it.
And there's always somebody else who's going to sell it.
And there's always somebody else who's going to sell it. So I guess we're going into crime here.
And even Joe Coronado has said, who's the Ocean County prosecutor, for anybody who might not know, you're not arresting your way out of this problem. And I would submit, and I'm not 100% convinced on how you deal with this, but our problem is we have hired these people. We've made it illegal, so we've made these street drugs illegal, and it's just like prohibition in the 20s. Mm-hmm. So we've created this black market economy with the worst of the worst people who have no regard for their future. Not all of them, but many of them. The piece of people who are most invested in selling this stuff are just the worst people on the face of the earth. And so, and we can't, I shouldn't say that might be extreme, but they're just not people who care about other human beings. Mm-hmm. And so we're fighting these people, and there's an endless supply of them who'll do it.
What tools does law enforcement need in order to contain this or get a grip on it?
I think there are some would argue, and I'm not sure I've come to a place on this, but we are paying for three sides of this. We're paying, people are buying it. We're paying to prosecute the people who are selling it. We're paying to some extent to prosecute the people who are using it, and then we're paying substantially less, but still a good amount of money to help people who are addicted to it. And there's a certain logic to the idea of let's spend all our money on people who are addicted to it. Because let's be clear about this too, and what the statistics tell us. It's a very small number of actual users who actually develop an addiction disorder. There are some statistics that say it's as little as 10%. Heroin's higher, it's a different order of drug, but overall, it's a relatively small number of people who become addicted. Most people try it, move on with their life. Now I want to be very responsible about this. That's not to say, you should probably not try it, because you don't know, you might be that person. But we're spending an incredible amount of money to protect the small number of people who might become addicted through law enforcement. We're finding ourselves short on money to give people who are raising their hand and saying, I'd like help to get off of this now, because we're spending, in part because we're spending so much money on the enforcement side of it. We're basically fighting our own population to a certain extent, who spends an awful lot of money buying it. It's just sort of a certain kind of madness. And on a certain level, the obvious thing might be to decriminalize a good chunk of it. We're already looking at decriminalizing and in fact probably legalizing it. I think the odds are whoever wins this election, and I think it'll be Phil, we're going to have a legalization bill on the governor's desk.
It's
And I don't
about
think
marijuana now.
about marijuana, which I think is clearly going to happen.
Okay, but that's revenue driven. That
Right.
is not a social issue for Democrats. That is about revenue. That's about taxing it and reaping a windfall, which is going to help that budget, which is constantly in the red. So how does it help?
I would disagree that it's entirely a revenue issue. I think it's been packaged and sold as a revenue issue, but I don't agree. I think it's a social justice issue in the sense that if you look at the science behind it, it's not harmless, but it's been unfairly put at a much higher level as far as the DEA is concerned, and it defies the science that it's been put in that category. So there's that. There's also the fact, yes, you can tax it, and that'll help with the revenue, and they believe that they'll get about $300 million in the budget every year. But also, if you make it, I'm a municipal court attorney, criminal attorney, do some other things. I'm telling you, you're going to save a lot of money in your municipal courts and your criminal courts not going out there and having to enforce this. Now you're going to lose some revenue from fines and et cetera, but also whenever you take money from people for this, that we've pretty much gotten to the point on marijuana where we believe that it's a very minor thing. We barely care about making this illegal anymore, yet it still is. So we're giving people criminal records, even minor ones. We're taking money from them in the courts. They're paying people like me. We're taking all this revenue out of like other things that people could be spending their money on. They're cutting back on something. They're going into debt somewhere, somehow. So you can't discount that part of it also. That you're taking money out of the system that should just be out there with people just in commerce spending money on other things. So I think there's a lot of social benefit to outweigh the relatively minor. We have cigarettes are legal, tobacco cigarettes are legal. By all, from what I understand from the people who look at this, you could almost make a better argument for making tobacco legal for all the damage it does to people.
We have about 60 seconds, Mr. Cooke.
Yep.
What would you like to tell everyone who's watching you right now and going to the polls in November?
I'm a small business owner, very small business owner. I'm a father. I live here. My kids are going to go to school here in the public schools here. And, people talk about attorneys. You always hear this term, wealthy attorney. Well, I'm not that category of attorney. I'm like many of you out there. I have a family to raise, and I want the best for them, and I want the best for Ocean County. And I'm thinking of the contractors and the small business people and the moms and the kids and the people who work hard for a living like I do, and people who work harder. I don't get my hands dirty, so there's people who work much harder than I do. I'm here thinking about them and intend to do the best for them in Ocean County. And I think, given the choices you have in November, I'm the best one for Assembly in the 10th District.
Michael Cooke, a look into a working mind and something to keep in mind as you go to the polls. And once again, we urge you to vote with your heart and vote with your conscience in November. Thanks for watching.